Then I went to work for another company where we did simulations and animations for Apollo moon landing. We were a display installation company. So basically, I will just say, in the conspiracy theory of the moon landing, we made a full quarter scale model of the modula in a big soundstage and video TV live that at the time of the supposedly moon
Say
landing.
that again?
We had made a full scale model like
Yeah.
this of the modular landing on the moon.
Yeah.
And that was being broadcast live from a sound studio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Wright, and welcome to Third Concept, a podcast about creativity and personal development and whatever else we want to talk about. I have not recorded for months, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. None of them really matter. What matters is that we are here together now, and we are joined by my new friend, Phil Ristaino.
Hi.
Phil is an actor and improviser, illustrator, singer, lyricist, songwriter, drummer, writer, and podcaster. He's also recently relocated to Atlanta, Georgia. He's appeared in films, TV shows, web shows, commercials, and podcasts for the last 30 years and performed in comedic, dramatic, and experimental projects on stages from New York City to San Francisco to Prague and the Czech Republic. Welcome, Phil. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on your show.
Phil has a lot more credits and a lot of links. He's got a lot of stuff going on, podcasts, websites. They're all going to be on the show notes, and we'll get to talk about some of those things later. But in contrast to the other people I've had on the show who are real life friends, people that I know, Phil, I pretty much literally just met. I've never seen him before. We've talked on the phone for about 5 minutes. He's inspired me to kind of just make this conversation more natural. I have no questions prepared. He's also assured me that we can make this as weird as possible because I enjoy weird. So if you are weird averse, just leave now and re-examine your life. So in that light, I would like to not even warm you up or the audience and get right into the question or story that I want to hear the most about. Can you tell me about your spiritual awakening?
Oh my God. Straight into that, huh?
Straight into it.
Oh boy. It's a weird story. And I appreciate that you like weird stories. Before I start, are you from the Northeast?
Yes.
Okay. I'm from Massachusetts originally. And I find that a lot of the people there, while sort of socially conservative, there's a underlying weirdness to their personalities. And I don't know if that's just from the cold or that Massachusetts or the Northeast just has some strange synthesis of people who are interested in the arts and philosophy and lifestyles. But yeah, I grew up with people who were weird. And so I don't know if that made me weird. I think I might have already been weird, but it was at least maybe a sort of a subculture that I was running in where everyone had a peculiar personality. And I'm not sure if that's, again, strictly a New England thing or what. I don't know. Do you, was that something that you
Well,
experienced?
it didn't resonate with me at first, but then when I think about other regions of the country, I feel, there's different types of weird. So maybe it's that whole, like, the so-called witches, but, there is that religious, freedom, so to speak, in this area where we were supposed to be settled. There's also, like, Pacific Northwest weird.
Definitely.
There's definitely the Southwest weird, more like UFOs and things. But I could, because I feel like we're almost annoyingly normal in certain ways.
People from the Northeast.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Like we want to seem normal.
They want to seem normal, and that's
too,
what's part of what's weird is that they are weird, but they think they're normal. That's what I found a lot with people from the Northeast. I lived in San Francisco for a while, and I found that San Francisco likes to think that it's a weird place, but then
Mm-hmm.
I found there were, when it came to like being in the arts, and I did a lot of theater and music and stuff like that, and very often I found maybe the people in the theater kind of
Yeah,
conservative
for sure.
personality wise, and I was always like, what's going on here? This is supposed to be like the weirdest part of America, but it really wasn't at all. So that's what, I don't know. Maybe it's some subversion of what they think they are, or maybe they're trying to be norm. Maybe they're trying to look weird because they're actually kind of normal, and people in Massachusetts or New England or whatever are trying to look normal because they're actually a little weird.
Mm.
So my spiritual awakening is a long story, and I'll try not to make it a long story, but I had a lot of difficult experiences when I finished college and went out into the world, and a lot of sort of like a year or two of kind of traumatic experiences, and a lot of my reality was sort of shattered. What I thought was real, the way I thought the world worked, and stuff like that. And simultaneous with that, I was part of a theater company that was doing experimental theater and went to Prague and performed all over the streets of Prague for a month. We did like a 12-day long play. And then we got into an underground theater called the Roxy, and we did a show there as well. And it was just like 3 months of real extreme experience. Every day something really crazy would happen. And like, for example, I had a guy pull a sword on me one day
Wow.
while I was out in the street performing. I was wearing a sword as well as part of my costume. But anyway, it was like that. It was just bananas. By the time I came back to the United States, I became just very open to whatever might happen to me out in the world. And I was up in Seattle, and this homeless Blackfoot man followed me and my sister and her friends into a coffee shop, and I had a conversation with him, and he was kind of profound and insane simultaneously. So something about the meeting with him affected me, and later on that year, I started writing and drawing a book with him as the narrator of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And about a year later, I had moved to San Francisco, and I was started to have a lot of synchronicities happen to me. Things that I was thinking about or whatever would sort of happen in real life. And I started writing and drawing this book again. And I was writing the story in his voice, in this Native American, this Blackfoot homeless man's voice. And I was walking down the street on Market Street in San Francisco, and there he was sitting on the ground in San Francisco. It was the same guy, and I had the book with me, I think, the pages that I was drawing and writing, and had another really profound conversation with this guy who was simultaneously, he was like an alien. He didn't talk like a person, really. He was just, he would sort of say profound things, but he was also like a total alcoholic living on the street, like a madman. About a year went by that year living in San Francisco, and I'm still on and off writing and drawing the book in his voice. And I drew this sequence where he was going into the garbage and finding something, and an earthquake happened. And I was in the same area where I had met him in San Francisco a year before. So initially, I'd met him in Seattle. A year later, I met him in San Francisco, and now it's a year later, and an earthquake occurred, and I walked down to very close to where I had met him before, and he came around the corner and walked straight up to a garbage can right in front of me and reached in the garbage and grabbed something and walked away. And then later on that day, I was riding my bike home, and I rode right to where I had met him a year before, and there he was again, and I had another weird conversation with this guy. And about 3 months went by. I had gotten a job just doing data entry, which was unusual for me. And I met this woman who was a witch, who worked at the job doing data
Mm-hmm.
entry in San Francisco. And I told her about my experiences with this guy, and she said, "All right, I have something for you." And she came back one day and she gave me this big rock in a pouch. And she said, "This is a stone. It's been blessed by a Native American holy man. I've done some magic on it. Next time you see this guy, give this to him and it'll help his soul find its home." She said it was like a healing stone, so I would wear it around my neck for the next couple of weeks or something. I got fired from the job. Not for anything I did, I just think they were letting go of people. So I left the job, I got on a train. I went 4 blocks down the street, I got off the train, and outside the door of the train was the guy lying on the street. So I walked up to him and I said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Do you know what this is?" I showed him the stone. He said, "Yes." I don't know if he knew. I said, "This is supposed to return your soul back to your home." So I took it off and I gave it to him and he put it on and he passed out. And I left and I never saw him again. And that was the beginning of years and years of all this other crazy stuff happening to me. But that was while that was all happening, there were all these sort of synchronicities happening to me. I was very open to sort of the universe talking to me. But the biggest part was the re-meeting this guy over and over again while I would write in his voice. So I was almost like writing the world, reality into. I was writing and drawing reality into reality, like fiction into reality. It was a really quite an intense way to wake up.
Yes, and it's funny you talk about synchronicities because we
Mm,
were talking about that in the last episode, and it's
mm,
something that I think about a lot because there's like a lot of different types of synchronicities. There's
sure.
like the bullshit one, like I remember one of the biggest synchronicities I ever had was I was at a family dinner, and for some reason we were discussing the phrase kick against the pricks, and I had
Okay.
never heard that phrase before.
Me
And
neither.
we talked about it. I think it means to like revolt against like authority or something. So I came home. This was years and years ago, so nobody was texting. I was married at the time, so I came home, and my husband at the time, he goes out of nowhere, he goes, "Have you ever heard the phrase kick against the pricks?"
Hmm.
And I was like, holy shit. Like my whole reality just, I was like, am I having a stroke? Whatever. But there was like no inherent me. Like it was just like a weird, there was no lesson. There was
Mm,
no, so it's like that, the probability of that happening is so low,
pretty
but
low.
means nothing. So
Hmm.
like your story clearly you're being led, you're being spoken to, like
Hmm.
there's a human who's some kind of intermediary. It
Hmm.
obviously led you somewhere. It
Hmm.
inspires you. It affected your life. Like when you have synchronicities now, do you feel like it's like a conversation, or do you feel like it's like a note at your door and you're like, okay, well, is FedEx going to come again tomorrow? Or like, is God going to talk to me again? Because this doesn't, I need something more substantial than this.
I think it's a combination of the things that you said. Sometimes it is a post-it note. Pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I was actually, it's funny what you just said was exactly what I was going to say. It's a conversation. I think, well, first of all, like, boy, we're getting into all this right off. Like, it really, like, I'd be curious what you think God is, but I'm going to call God in my model the consciousness of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
like some greater the source or the force. I always like the force from Star Wars because it's impersonal and
Mm-hmm.
but it's a thing that permeates everything. And I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty good descriptor of what I
Mm-hmm.
kind of see God as. But you could look at it as a general giant overarching consciousness of the universe itself, of everything in the universe, which includes you. So your God as you, as Lisa, you're God experiencing the universe as Lisa. I'm God experiencing the universe as Phil. If you want to look at it like a source, you could even look at it in computer terms, like it's a thing that you input into and you get output out of. So what you create and what you do is you feed into the rest of the universe. You put it out there as energy or consciousness or what have you. And then it gives you back you get feedback from it, and not feedback in like a like a woo kind of a noise, like
Right.
but more like you get information back from your surroundings based on what you put out there. I kind of look at my story as, well, in a pure form, I was writing a story, right? Writing and drawing a story. And so
Mm.
a lot of my consciousness was focused on this, and it was important to me. And there's a lot of energy going into that. And so that's sort of like a thing that I'm putting out into the universe and charging with energy. I've heard like emotion described as energy in motion, so
Mm-hmm.
that emotions have a lot of, intensity to them. They have a lot of power to them, energy. So how you feel about a thing is just as important as what you think about it. And the combination of those things gets put out into the universe, and then if you're aware enough or just looking for signs, you'll find signs. And those are the synchronicities, and those are God, the force, the source, the consciousness of the universe talking back to you. So I do think in reality, really what's going on is we're constantly in conversation with this greater consciousness, and it's all about whether you want to listen to the conversation or not.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
When I listen to you, it feels like there's a neutrality to some extent to this
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, which is like a newer concept I feel
Mm.
that I've only started hearing, where there was more of like a karma or a whatever, like some sort of polarity or duality outside of this plane. Frankly, I think that all the duality is right here, and
Yeah.
that's what is very confusing. Like, and in terms of like law of attraction or whatever, I've been hearing where it's just like you put out there the stuff, like you're creating it, like you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to the universe and saying, do I have a permission slip to get this thing? It's more like that you're an active participant, just like in your story where I feel like this may have been one of your first experiences where you were conscious that you were an active creator.
Yeah. Aware that there's another part, there's something else in conversation with me. I was
Yeah.
looking for it. But you could even look at karma as neutral, and just again look at it as like this law of energy, where energy is neither created nor destroyed. So it's just sort of like movement. You look at
Mm-hmm.
everything as movement in a way, because you can make choices. You can choose to do good things, or you can choose to do evil things, or maybe you can choose to do slightly neutral things, or things on a spectrum of good to evil. And because we have that kind of choice, you get to choose what you want to put out there into the
Mm-hmm.
universe. And you'll get a response no matter what. If you punch
Mm-hmm.
someone in the face, they might punch you back. But
Yeah.
if you give somebody a flower, then maybe, maybe a week later, like the flower will bloom in your backyard that you've never seen before. I kind of look at you think about like video games, and they talk about how you have like an avatar in a video game, and you make the character, the avatar, do things based on how you move it around or whatever. You could say that we are avatars for some greater level of consciousness, that
Mm.
where we exist somewhere else, and that this place, the Earth, this 3D place, is a higher level of video game that your higher self has come down and manifested in, and you are the avatar of your higher self running around in Planet Earth video game doing stuff. And yeah, what do you feel there's a neutrality, or is that how is that a new experience for you in relation to these kind of thoughts? How did you normally look at it?
I'm not sure. I mean, like, it's something I'm still thinking about because
Hmm.
I'm always examining this notion of right and wrong, good and bad, because
Yeah.
you have choices,
Yeah.
and society decides what good and bad, and I think we're experiencing some real change in terms of how we assess all this stuff, and I like that because I don't I don't think that a lot in life is black and white necessarily. So we as a society, as communities, as individuals, we all make these decisions for ourselves. But is there something, like beyond the universe that decides, what's good, like nature murders all the time,
All
like
of us,
all the
we all
time.
get murdered.
Yeah,
Hmm.
right. Yeah. So no one would ever say murder is okay because nature does it. It's natural.
Yeah.
But endings are required. So how do we define an end? Like just stuff like that. Like, how do I align with what I'm supposed to do? Okay, maybe there
Mm.
isn't anything you're supposed to do. Which, leads me to my next question.
Yeah.
You have obviously lived, you've said you've sacrificed a lot to live an artistic life. And I think about art all the time. What's the purpose? It's
Ugh.
to me, art is like spirituality, where
Yeah.
it's if you are Jesus like a guy who gives up everything to live the truth or to create something pure.
Hmm.
You mentioned, the love-hate relationship that we have with artists and actors and
Hmm.
we look down upon them, but yet we revere them and they make us cry and they make us
Hmm.
feel all kinds of things that our, family might not even feel.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about this choice and how it's affected your life and why you continue to do it, and why you think it's important.
I found myself drawn to the arts really early. And I found myself able to do it as well. Like I could draw when I was really young, 4. I started acting when I was 5. I started making music maybe around 5th grade. I could always write. I hear music in my head and I don't know how to play anything but the drums, but I can write music with people. Like I can sit down with a guitar player and I can even make suggestions about melodies and stuff like that. I hear the parts and the multiple parts in my head, and it's just like a lot of that stuff. I feel like it's just getting fed to me often. Sometimes when I would perform as an actor or doing improvisation as doing like comedy improv on stage, there'd be times where I felt like I was just channeling something, like I was just getting fed what to
Mm-hmm.
do. Someone says something and here's a joke that pops in my head and boom, it's the right thing to say. And that
Mm-hmm.
moment in the crowd really responds to it. And but I'm just listening to the muse, you know what I mean? I'm listening to some sort of voices in my head that know what to do, know the right thing to do. That's who I was. That's who I am. Like I'm that guy who does that, who is I mean, I don't know. It feels obnoxious to say like a Renaissance man. That feels too obnoxious. But just like that quality of like want to participate in all the arts, and I
Mm-hmm.
feel an innate ability to translate what's going on in my head in different ways through different forms. So that's who I am. And because our society has been based on money and capitalism, proving your worth, proving your value through being able to bring a service to the community, ultimately that's what capitalism is sort of about, is like providing a service to
Mm-hmm.
the community, but competitively, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is sort of insane to compete for a service to the community. It's not really a rational thing to do. Art doesn't have any intrinsic value in that way. Art, I think, it's an opportunity to retranslate reality in all different kinds of ways, and that something about humans need this experience of retranslating reality. They talk a lot about like the idea of like catharsis, where you watch a movie and you live through the character in the movie and you feel the emotions that the character is experiencing through the movie. I think catharsis probably comes from Greek Greek plays or something like that, where you're moved by the spirit of the play, and it almost has a healing effect on you, much in the same way like Native American spiritual traditions. They are shamanic. Ultimately, you'd wear a mask and become another character. You'd embody the spirit of the gods in one way or another, and through that, you imbue catharsis to the viewer. So there's something that humans need that is not about food and shelter, that because that the artist provides. And when you're in a society that wants you to prove your worth through providing service to others, art is considered a luxury and not a need. So ultimately, the artist is sort of shunned. Do you have an art form that you participate in?
I'm predominantly a writer, but I also play piano, so some
really?
musical ability.
What kind of music do you play?
One of my favorite types of music to play is actually ragtime music.
Really?
It's so much fun.
The original classical American music. That's what Scott Joplin was trying to do, is create classical American music, and instead he created ragtime. Incredible.
So
it's
much
a really
fun.
active form of playing the piano.
Yeah,
it looks hard.
It is hard, but it's in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you get it right. It's just all about like stress relief, and I mean, the songs themselves are beautiful, and I would have the sheet music and I would play them, and I would have my own little arrangements and stuff, and then I would see a movie and actually hear it, and I'll be like, "Ooh, that's totally okay." I was kind of just doing that all wrong, but they're really beautiful, and there's other, it's not just Scott Joplin. There's other composers, and I don't know, it's one of my favorites. But
why ragtime though?
I think I just, as a kid, my father was an older father, so he would give me like Showtime or music, and like all these old songs that really like didn't have much meaning to me, and then one just had The Entertainer in it, and he taught me how to do like the stride and the side, and I was like, ooh, what is that all about? And it just seemed like so different and alive, and then I just started getting more sheet music, and I was like, oh, this is a whole thing. Like, this is not just the one song that you hear in every like cowboy movie. So
did he teach you to read too, or did you learn
he
yourself?
did, yeah.
Wow.
He taught me to read, taught me how to do everything, really.
Would you like to play ragtime for a living, or is it just a fun pastime? Like, what's your relationship with doing it?
I don't play too much anymore now. I'll just kind of pick out like more modern. Like, I really like Radiohead. That's a pretty conducive to piano. And they have, talk about weird, they have some real weird chord progressions. It's like, what is going on? I'll like sit there and I'll just be like, okay, F sharp, C sharp, A okay, all the sharps. We're just on the black keys right now. I don't know what's happening. And like the tempos, it's always like that off tempo thing. So yeah, I'll just pick out something and play it for like a half hour over and over and over again, and then close the piano up and go on with my life. But I've seen like I've seen a lot of your stuff, but I've seen your artwork, and it's really beautiful. It's got like this very ethereal quality to it. You had one line, it said, art as a multidimensional means of communication, what decoding the arts does for understanding other forms of media. What does being like multi-talented in all these different types of art and expression, are there types you prefer? Is it like, well, acting kind of makes me does this for me, art does this something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they scratch different itches, I kind of feel like music, because it vibrates through, sound vibrations, it in some ways it's the purest art form. Feels like because when you start talking about sound vibration, then you start to get into like the molecular construction of reality, and so I feel like there's something about music that everybody responds to in a really intense, primal way, more than almost any other art form. Even if you hate music, there's something about music that'll make you hate it just as much as people will fall in love with it, I like acting because it's a more communal art form. You're always working with groups of people, usually, even if it's just like you and somebody else in a scene, there's at least a director and someone running the lights and the sound and whatever else. The camera if you're shooting film. There's something beautiful about a group of people who come together to achieve a thing, and there's a certain quality about people that make theater or film where they're gung-ho to make the thing. There's a lot other art forms. People can be more passive participants in some ways, or
Yeah,
even
true.
like when you're hanging out with a group of musicians, it can be tricky to wrangle them all. But when you're making a piece of theater or film, everybody has to be on board for it to work, and everyone has to be like trying to achieve the goal. So that's an incredible synthesis of all these components that can really hit you if you do it right. Can hit the viewer on multiple levels, and you have these sort of like epiphanies of realization when you're watching something, and that experience of catharsis as well. So you're living through it, you're living through the story, and you're in the story too, and you can come out from a piece of theater or a great movie feeling changed. You know what I mean? Like you almost
Of
like
course.
it's almost like you had a good cry or something. So that's a really beautiful art form to participate in, and a different form than making music. And then something like visual art is much more internal and something that you do usually on your own or with very few people. And then even the exchange of visual art is usually with one other person. So that's a very personal form of expression, like writing. It's you alone in the page, trying to explain things and trying to tell stories and stuff like that. And then you put that out there and someone reads your book and they live through your book for a while. And it really takes them out of their regular life and gives them this whole new experience to go through on their own, but it's very solitary. So there's something beautiful and personal about that. So every art form kind of provides a different opportunity of experience, and I like it all. And I'm always I'm very open-minded in that way. So I think we're here to experience things as people on the planet, and so I want to do that. I want to experience as much as I can while I still can, and I just want to do it all. I don't know. I'm greedy. I think I'm greedy.
I think there is probably a sense of greed with artists.
Yeah.
Okay, well, definitely compulsion, I would
Yeah.
say.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
And I think it's all related to that whole God self, and God just wants to create more. And then so do we, and we're like, okay, I have to do this thing. Like, I can't apparently sleep unless or get a job. Like,
well, some part of you is eternal, in my opinion, so it wants to express that part of itself through the art. I feel like the arts is like it's also an itch you can never scratch. You're trying to get at a thing that, because you're mortal, you'll never quite get there, but it's an ideal, or an eternity, a form of eternity, an ideal, which is not real, that you're trying to approach or trying to explain or pointing at the moon, as they say. So
we haven't even talked about the moon at all.
Yeah.
What would you like to talk about in terms of the moon?
Well, I have a lot I might want to talk about, but I'd be curious to hear what you might think of the moon first before I start talking about it.
What do I think?
Yeah,
of
you have
it?
any thoughts
I
about the
don't
moon?
know that I have any original thoughts. I think it's fucking insane that it exists. Like, sometimes I look at, you forget it's there, and sometimes
Yeah.
you sit and like when it's looking really nice and big and clear, and you look up and you're like, holy shit! Like, it's freaking incredible. Like,
Yeah.
the stars, it's a little too far off to really. My pea brain just can't digest what I'm looking at. The sun, a little ostentatious. It's like, I can't even
Can't
look
look
at
at
you
the
for that.
sun.
I'm not even.
Can't
it
look
hurts.
at it.
Like, no, be
No.
quiet. It's like the loudest person in the room. You're like, no,
Yeah.
I gotta leave. But the moon is. I once interviewed a guy who was tasked with building fake sets the weekend of the moon landing. I forget who he worked for, whether it was
What?
NASA or something. Yeah, I think this is my fear, because he said, I don't know. He
What
was
do you
like,
mean you interviewed this guy who did this? What are you talking about?
the interview was about something completely different, and he was just
Okay.
like, hey, I just gotta let you know, I built these fake sets So I thought about this for years and years because he's like, I'm not saying it's not real. I just know they told me they built like a thing with little people or whatever just to have it. So
he's doing this in 69?
Yeah.
He's building little people. He wanted little moon.
I
set on the moon
I may
with
have
little
added
people.
that
Or...
detail, but it was like they just said make it like a functioning whatever.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. So because I said, are you trying to tell me the moon landing was fake? He's like, no. All I'm saying is they asked me to build this set. So what I think was if something bad happened, it was like gonna eat or like a B-roll or something, like just like a plan B for who knows what. I don't know, but I think about it all the time.
It would make sense to do that, to have a plan B. You would hope that they would have one, right? Because if the guys like land on the moon and they all die and you don't want to broadcast that on TV, like that's
so they just
not
go
very,
to my friend Todd's set.
Yeah.
Best way back with your regularly scheduled moon landing.
Oh God, you're right. Yeah, then they cut to Todd's set. Oh, I mean that's geez, we don't want to go into the moon landing. I mean that's such a huge thing.
But I miss those conspiracies. Like I miss getting mad at people who are like the JFK conspiracy, the moon.
Sure.
It's like bring those back. Don't this.
It's
Sandy
so
Hook
innocent now,
conspiracy.
right?
Yeah, like I don't want to hear any of these insane conspiracies. Well, I want to know what you wanted to talk about with the moon.
Well, I want to know what the hell it is. Like, what's it doing there? Why doesn't the moon spin? It rotates perfectly so that the same side faces us at all times. Doesn't that seem weird? Like, doesn't everything else spin for the most part? Most bodies, planetary, like celestial bodies, don't they mostly rotate on an axis? What's this thing doing perfectly, staying stuck to one face,
wheelhouse.
showing us in the? I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. It's also so big, and it perfectly blocks out the sun so that we have these eclipses. It's like the perfect ratio. It's in the perfect spot and the perfect size to perfectly obscure the sun when the sun, the moon, and the earth are lined up. And that seems impossible. So I really wonder what the hell it is, if it's real.
So you're not worried about the moon landing. You're wondering if the moon is even real at all.
Well, if it's an actual moon or if it's something else, what if it's a giant machine that somebody put there to serve a certain purpose? So I had an experience. See, here's a weird experience that I had.
Okay.
So I was at a dance party, a rave in the woods in California in the 90s. And I hope this doesn't get too racy for your listeners, but that part of the party was everybody there was going to take ecstasy. And everyone stood in a circle at the beginning of the party and all took this same kind of ecstasy at the same time. And whatever this stuff was, it wasn't ecstasy. So it made me personally feel really terrible. And I got very started feeling very slow and tired and sort of hazy. I spent most of the evening sitting down. But so I'm sort of at some point, not responding well to this thing, sitting on the ground, looking up at the sky, and the moon, it was like a full moon in the sky. And what I started to see was a network of lightning bolts generating out. They seemed to be all streaming out of the moon and connecting to each other all the way across the sky, like a giant net of lightning bolts that emanated from the moon and seemed to broadcast all across the entire night sky. And they were kind of it was all there all at once. It wasn't like lightning bolts that are shooting out of the moon. It was as if the lightning bolts were solid and were all simultaneously just sitting there and sort of emanating out of the moon like a net. It looked like a giant net. And there's a thing is it Hinduism where they talk about Indra's net? And I kind of I always wondered what the hell was that? It was it wasn't a normal hallucination. I've had hallucinations before, and this was not a normal. There was something specific and odd about it. I wondered if I can start to get weird with you, I kind of wondered if it was like a consciousness net. If the moon was there designed to keep us keep us coming back onto this planet over and over again, so that, or maybe to hold our consciousness in place in a certain way so that we only can experience a certain degree of reality, like in the way that we only see a certain amount of colors on the color spectrum. Our eyes only take in certain amounts of information, that kind of thing. What if the moon is there to as like a machine to hold our consciousness in place so that we only perceive a certain level of reality here as people?
Well, I'm not even digesting this in a cool way. It's in like a very practical way because
Yeah.
I think about like smudge sticks all the
Okay.
time.
Okay.
Smudge, clear your area with a smudge
Right.
stick. I'm
Right.
thinking, first off, my negative energy can blast through that goddamn smoke.
Right.
Like, you're not, no.
Yeah.
But if it really is a way to cleanse energy, what
Yeah.
the fuck? Like some, like
What
a,
is it doing?
what, I
What's
need to
happening?
get some sage. First off,
Yeah.
I don't even like sage. Everybody who knows me thinks I think it's disgusting.
Oh, really?
If you have some, like universal God that's all powerful,
Mm-hmm.
is it really going to be like, well, if the earthlings do want to cleanse their space, like,
Mm-hmm.
I get confused when physical things have a spiritual purpose. It doesn't click for me. So like if God needed to like have a little portal or something to control us, would he be like, what if we just put a big rock there? But at the same time, like, we have hearts that do a job for us, like that feel or whatever. We have brains that completely limit our entire perception of our lives and realities and what's going on and what we want to do and what we don't want to do. So there is obviously that connection, but I get tripped up in understanding like, well, why though?
But why though? Yeah, I mean, the heart and the brain also exert a certain amount of magnetic force or electrical force. I think it can be measured. So, I mean, if your thoughts are electrical, what's really going on? Have you ever looked into the idea of the ether?
No.
So the alchemists would talk about the 5 elements. So it's air, water, earth, fire, and ether is the 5th element. And ether, you could look at it as electricity, or you could look at it as an understanding of consciousness. They might be the same thing. So, what if the ability to have a synchronicity has to do with your thoughts being electrical, there's an electrical aspect to your thoughts, or to the way, or to a certain electricity that your heart gives off, and it creates an electrical wave in the ether, which could be like, you could look at the ether as like an invisible force that kind of looks like water, like it's like electricity as water in a way, and it permeates everything. So it's almost like this element that's invisible to our eyes, but that is, for lack of a better way of putting it, this electrical force that permeates all of matter and is part of matter in a way. It's just invisible to us in the way that we understand things, but things like your thoughts interact with it. So if you're sending out a thought signal in the electrical water field that emanates through everything, then that is the way you put something out and get something back, and that's how you get a synchronicity. Your thought broadcasts an electrical pulse through the field. It goes out. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, so it just transforms and turns into some other thought from somebody else and gets sent back to you again. They talk about like your brain as a receiver. The pineal gland in your brain is like, it has little crystals in the pineal gland. They could be they use crystals to run computers. I mean, you could look at it as a receiver. So it could be a thing that transmits and receives electrical impulses from the ether. So what if we are these consciousness machines, and something for some reason wants to keep our consciousness at a certain level, or in order to have the earth experience in 3D world where we don't experience the infinity of what we really are. You need to limit the consciousness in a certain way. And so you put the moon there to broadcast a field around the world to keep our consciousness at a certain level so everyone can have an experience of 3D. I live, I die, I grow 60 to 80 years old, and my life is finite, and I do these things, and I'm me. I'm not everything. I'm just Phil, so I don't know. There's a lot of it's sort of an endless Ouroboros of thought in a way, but what if there's just these other levels of reality that we don't normally understand, but that are there, that some cultures in some parts of history were participating with, and that we've sort of rejected in a certain way. That's kind of my general thought in terms of that conversation about the moon.
Okay. I'm gonna never look at the moon the same way again, but I'm gonna, instead of looking at it as a possible limiting, I'm gonna look at it as a protecting, like.
Yeah, what's it there for? None of the other planets have just one big moon that's really close up and not spinning. It's a
Maybe
weird
it sounds
thing.
so nefarious, like it's like.
Well, you don't have
Big
to think of
Brother
it
is
as
the moon.
nefarious if you don't want to. I mean, it could just be serving a purpose, but what is it? What purpose is it really serving? What is it really doing there?
I think we need another manned mission to the moon.
Yeah, I think we should be constantly going there and with live TV broadcasts showing us things that they found up there, So I find it fishy that we started going and then stopped. It seems odd.
Was the Challenger on the way to the moon?
I don't think so. No,
No?
those were the space shuttles were just sort of
It
usually
was-
they were like
just hung
in
out.
orbit and going to like a
Yeah.
satellite or something.
Hmm.
You remember when there was that bit? What was the lab? The something lab, space lab that was there with like we'd be up there with the Russians and other people just sort of doing tests and shit. And
I think they just raced up there, and then they were like, all right, we did it.
we did it. What more do you got to do? Yeah, right. We've
Todd-
done everything you can do.
Todd,
We
break
played
down the
golf. We played golf on the moon. That's about. I drove a little car on it, and that's about it. That's all we needed to know.
So abrupt subject change.
Sure.
Tell me about how you got into podcasting and talk about your two. You have two, right?
I only have one show, really.
Oh, you only
but
have
I'm-
one?
Yeah, I'm on a
Two
new
websites.
I have two websites. My one website, thesearedreams.com, is my website where you can see my acting, my art, and my music and other stuff. But then I have another site that's just dedicated to the podcast. It's called the Post Relevant Podcast, and the website is postrelevant.com. So during the pandemic, I was making an album with some friends, and it was a really soul-crushing experience doing this for many reasons, and didn't really go the way I was hoping it would go, and was a very disheartening artistic experience. So I wanted to do something that was just for me, and that was a way that I could explore all these levels of creativity, and there wouldn't be anybody telling me no. So I'd been a huge podcast fan for well over a decade, probably even 15 to 20 years listening to podcasts. And I always wanted to do one, but I never had like a great in of like, I didn't want to just be interviewing my friends, which, ultimately a lot of podcasts, that's what you kind of find yourself doing. Hopefully you have interesting friends, But I wanted there to be a real reason that I was doing it. And so during the pandemic, I was hanging out with my brother Andy, who's a great animator, a great artist. He's worked on that show Adventure Time, and he's the lead character designer for this Fox show called Crapopolis, which is about the Greek gods. That's what he's doing currently. He's an amazing visual artist. So he and I had both heard about this movie, Under the Silver Lake. And he saw it first, and he was like, you got to see this movie, man. So I watched it, and then I hung out with him, and I watched it. And I noticed at some point in the movie something about one of the characters was wearing. It looked, maybe even Andy pointed it out, I can't remember, but it kind of looked like the type of thing that Egyptian goddesses wear, where
Mm-hmm.
like the middle part of the dress was cut out. So you could see like
Mm-hmm.
the middle section of the woman's body. And I started thinking about that and looking at the scene that it was happening in and seeing that there were other sort of symbolic things in the
Mm-hmm.
screen, like in the frame during the scene. And the film itself, Under the Silver Lake, is all about this guy trying to decipher these codes
Mm-hmm.
and following a mystery deeper and deeper into the bowels of LA. I started thinking, you know what? There was already people online thinking that there are written number and letter codes that are hidden in the movie. And I realized from watching the movie, I'm like, this whole movie's a code. I'm going to decode the whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, this is it. This is what I can podcast about. I will go and explain this entire movie piece by piece. So I get on, line like we're doing here with my brother, and I take copious notes over the whole movie, and we'd talk about 10 minutes of the film, and I would talk about the characters in the film and what they're saying and the things that they do and the other things that are shown, like somebody's dog or a radio or things like that, or something that like guy smoking a cigarette. And I would break it all down and explain it 10 minutes at a time. With the episode of the podcast could be an hour and a half, and I would have talked about 10 minutes of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured it out. I think I figured it out because I figured out that there are these huge mythological codes inside of the film, and that the true like central symbol in the film is the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing us back to the other conversation,
Mm-hmm.
because there will always be three women throughout the movie, different groups of three women,
Mm-hmm.
and the moon in Greek mythology is symbolized by three goddesses: the maiden, the mother, and the crone.
Mm-hmm.
The mother's Demeter, and the crone is. I'm blanking. I'm drawing blanks right now. Anyway, the maiden gets pulled into the underworld by the god of the underworld, and the mother goes to find her, and the crone witnesses the abduction and gives the mother clues. And so in Greek mythology, these goddesses have access to the underworld, which is sort of like the idea of the subconscious in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And especially the crone, she has the keys to the underworld. And so if you understand this central symbol in the film, you can take it and decipher the rest of the movie by realizing that this movie is about the moon, and that the moon is also a symbol of the silver screen of Hollywood itself, the
Mm-hmm.
holy wood, the magic wand. So it's about magic, and it's about about women, and about the moon is the different phases of a woman's lives in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of a magical subliminal subconscious power to that. The movie's called Under the Silver Lake. It might as well be called Under the Silver Moon or Under the Silver Screen, So that's how Hollywood works, this form of magic, witchcraft as well. And there's
Mm-hmm.
sort of like evidence for like covens of witches in Hollywood as well. It kind of like looking into this movie and translating it and going super deep into mythology. I learned all this amazing stuff, and the episodes kept on getting bigger and bigger, and I went deeper and deeper into mythology and eventually was explaining like the myth of Orion, of Osiris and Isis and the Great Pyramid, and that they come from somewhere else in the universe. And this myth that this idea that is possibly being used as a secret religion in elite levels of society and in the elite levels of Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
So that became my whole first season of my podcast. And I think it turned out pretty well. It was really cool. And I would interview all these different people and look into all this different kinds of mythology. And I put in music and read ancient text and all this stuff. And after that, I tried to go into a second season, and I couldn't. I made about 3 episodes in, and I burnt out, and I stopped. So I stopped doing it. But now in the last month, I've started having this conversation with a friend of mine who wanted to start watching Twin Peaks season 3. and wanted to watch it with me. I'd already seen it, but he wanted to watch it with me and talk about it, like separate from my podcast. He just was like, let's do that. And I'm like, look, I'd already told people that if I ever rewatched Twin Peaks season 3, that I would try to explain it in the same way that I explained Under the Silver Lake. So I was like, look, if you want me to do that, then you have to go on the podcast with me, and we'll break down Twin Peaks season 3 episode to episode. So every podcast, every conversation that we have, we go through every millimeter of an episode and try to really break it down and decode it and explain it. So that's what I'm up to now. That'll probably be coming out starting in January at some point. We're going to explain all 18 episodes of Twin Peaks season 3.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like the first season, it's less about really the movie and more about mythology to begin. Like I feel like that's what you're coming away with, the learnings as a listener. I mean, mythology is incredible. Do you ever feel like sometimes, like as a writer, having been in lots of classes or whatever, like where people are like, here's how to interpret this poem or this piece of art. And then sometimes you hear people and they say, or interpreting your own stuff, and then they say, oh, I'm getting this and this and this. And you're thinking, that's not my intention at all. But that's incredible. Like, I love it. It's like, becomes a new piece of art. Do you think like when you guys analyze this stuff, are you picking up like what you're getting that is more your interpretation? Like, obviously some of it is just like factual, like this is the same symbolism, but here's my kind of spin on it.
Well, ultimately, I'm only going to have my spin. So no matter what I think is real, I can only see it through my lens. So I'll get things wrong, obviously. Under the Silver Lake, I went really hard on trying to show I tried to justify all of my interpretations with all this research and even decoding names and things that people say. And it all seemed to relate back to this idea of the mythology of the moon and the mythological character of Dionysus. And so I just kept on coming. All of my research kept on bringing me back there over and over and over again as I would translate the movie. And it almost started to become silly because so many of the symbols in the film were really just like adding up to the number 13, which is 13 moon cycles in a year. It was always the moon. It was always back to the moon over and over and over again. Ideally, people could listen to that whole season 1 of my podcast and watch the movie and come away with a base that they can go in and use to help them decipher it as well. That's ideally what I'm offering them, as well as like an opportunity to say, hey, look, you can put out a multi-dimensional piece of art that can affect people on all these different levels. And if you don't just tell them what it means, but if you let the viewer do work, they're going to get a lot more out of your work of art, and they can get multiple levels out of your work of art as well. So it's going to radiate. It's going to be super meaningful for them as a thing, as a conversation piece, as a conversation between the viewer and the artist, That's something you can do with art if you really want to. Something like Twin Peaks, David Lynch he never will explain his art. He refuses to explain it, right? So I think he knows a lot of what it is and doesn't want to tell us. But then I also think he has these intuitive experiences internally and visually in his mind, because he's big into transcendental meditation. And he talks about catching the big fish, and that you go and meditate and cast out your reel. And that if you get a great idea, that's like catching a big fish. So it's like the universe giving him something back. So I think part of it is he doesn't know what it means also, but he respects the idea, and he wants to translate the idea and give it to us and let us deal with it. Let the viewer wrestle with it. Don't tell the experiencer what to know, what to learn. Let them have their own personal experience with the work of art. Just as much your translation of Twin Peaks season 3 is just as meaningful as anything I could possibly say about it, and more meaningful to you because it resonates with your experience. So there's those two different But I do think it's possible to take the context of what they're showing you and telling you and what the characters are saying and try the best that you can to make sense out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun too. It's like
Mm.
solving a giant puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a worthwhile exercise for people who either like the arts or are artists and want to try to understand how another artist made their art and what the
Mm.
choices are that they
Mm-hmm.
made. And that can show you how to make art too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I think it's a really valuable experience to go through, taking a work of art that is obscure or inscrutable and try to truly see if you can understand it and decipher it and see what you have to offer also. You know, like, can you offer something in the larger societal conversation in interpreting this artist's work?
I used to go to it was called an occult book club. So I used to
Yeah,
go
cool.
there and I would read the book, you know, like while I'm having my morning coffee, you know, just like reading blah, 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 blah. Then I go there and all these people were much more intelligent than me, much more well-read, knew all kinds of obscure facts.
Yeah.
And they would then explain. I felt like they were re-explaining the book to me. I was like, "Did I even read this book?" So I feel like that's the same thing where people who enjoyed this show, or you know, I don't know if they could watch along with you. I don't know. Is it like episode like is each episode of your podcast like aligned with an
Yes.
episode? Okay,
Yeah.
so they could watch along with you basically and
For
have
Twin
like a
Peaks
recap.
season 3, you can listen to me translating episode 1 as a single episode.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So that's like especially with people who don't have somebody to watch it with. It's
Mhm.
nice to have that like re-download where it's like, okay, what did I miss? And then it could be this way of having somebody else give feedback without having to, you know, find somebody like you to, like your friend found you, like to watch
Mhm.
with. So
Yeah, I find it weird too that there's some aspect of modern society where, especially because of podcasts, we want to tell each other about what we saw
yeah,
and retell it.
Mhm.
I don't know how that happened, but now that's what
I
we
know.
do.
It's
Is we
very odd,
retell
yeah.
our viewing experiences and listening experiences. I feel like part of that has to do with like you're trying to wrap your brain around it, and you're trying to see what you've understood. And so in the retelling, you reveal to yourself what you figured out, what your experience was, and then the listener can listen to you talk about it and think back on the thing, like let's say episode 1 of Twin Peaks, and think about like, yeah, that moment was really weird. What was the going on there? You know, that affected me in a certain way too. And here's this person's opinion about it or translation of it. Oh, that's kind of interesting. And then they can go back and rewatch it with like a deeper potential way of understanding it. And then they can go deeper into it too and get more out of it. You know, so it's kind of a fun, weird feedback loop of ideally it just allows the people who are into that work of art to go deeper into the work of art and get more out of it.
And everybody's always looking for new podcasts to listen to as
True.
well. So it is postrelevant.com.
Postrelevant.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any other weird topics to discuss tonight?
Oh, God, I don't know. We've got a lot of them just now.
I think we got a lot covered. I might have to
Yeah.
have you back on to talk about more.
I'd
more
love
weird
to.
things.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about anything, and always interested to hear whatever's going on with you that you might want to throw at me and see if I've got a take.
I really appreciate you coming on. This has
My
been
pleasure.
a very healthy dose of weird that I very sorely needed in my life. So I
Great.
appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Phil. When Phil used the phrase pointing at the moon, I think he was referring to a quote from the Buddha that says, "Imagine someone is trying to show you the moon by pointing at it." The Buddha suggests that there are many things in life that we may not ever see without having it pointed out to us, but we mustn't mistake the guidance for the thing itself. Your heartbreak isn't self-love. It's a path that was revealed to you. Losing your job, your home, or a loved one, these are things that may have occurred to open up a new way of thinking. That synchronicity wasn't the universe. It's what the universe happened to text you that day. Your prayers, your rituals, their fingers leading to that electrical ether. I've been thinking a lot about what in this life is truly real. Most of what we see, believe, feel, and even love is transitory. Many of our motivations in life, like our family, our kids, even our bodies, are temporary. So, what's eternal? What's your life pointing at? Have you been following a finger, or are your sights locked on the moon? For me, for now, my own consciousness is the only thing that has been with me every second of every day of my life. Sadly, I can't even prove to you what the moon even is. But my consciousness, she and I are close. Our thoughts, our reaction to our thoughts, our ability to entertain new thoughts, that's what's really most important. They say you can't take it with you, but if there is something after this life, of anything, you're bringing your consciousness. So I say, let's get greedy and make this life the one where we feed our consciousness with the most beautiful art, incredible music, and not just love the lovely, but love everyone. Happy New Year, everyone. I hope it's a great one.